welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. As always, I'm Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu. Love you all. Thank you very much for listening in. We've been talking lately on the podcast, about different things where we're actioning, we're pruning. Mid-spring jobs before summer, and talking about candle cutting. There's going to be talk about, coming up with decandling for black pines. There's going to be an episode coming up talking about that last minute stuff to do before summer gets here. So I thought, let's have a talk about the other side of the coin, where it's, when do you know if it's best just to let your bonsai grow, just to do its thing? Do you really need to get in there and prune everything? When is it better for the tree just to be left alone? So I thought I'd dedicate this podcast to that, as well as talking about sacrifice branching. I know it's a topic that's been covered before, but I've got a slightly different take on sacrifice branches. And with all this pruning going on, now's a great time to have a look through the trees, and before you get your scissors out or your branch cutters, before you decide to make it look pretty and get a nice silhouette, that's the time when you can really hone in and say, well, that would be a really nice sacrifice branch for this reason, whatever that reason is, which we'll talk about in the podcast. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening, and let's get into the podcast. So when is it best just to let your bonsai grow? Just let it do its thing. I'll talk about this in a roundabout sort of way, but I always focus on what happens above is happening below. So if I've got a tree that's, slightly weakened, or it's been repotted, it's come out of a crappy soil mix, and I'm thinking I really want to try and boost the root system on this tree, I like to let the foliage grow, so then the root capacity can support that massive amount of foliage, and then come back in and prune the foliage back, but it still gives me excess root capacity, especially as we head towards warmer weather. There's some really hot days coming. Where I'm in Melbourne, we seem to get 1 or 2 hot days, and followed by a week of very, very cool average temperature. Again, the grass is loving it, the trees are loving it, but for me, I'd just like a little bit warmer. If I can transition from pants to shorts permanently, that would be great. So let's see if the bonsai gods can organise that for me. But I want to focus on letting my root system grow. So I do that through the foliage mass. And normally, if I've got a tree that's in that position, it's normally in a state where I think I've got to improve the health of the tree. So for me, the health of the tree always starts and finishes with the root system of the tree. If that's weak, then I keep pruning and I keep bending and twisting and shaping and making look pretty up the top. Sooner or later, there's going to be a cost to it. There'll be dieback. May even be the terminal death of the bonsai itself. But if I'm focusing on the root system itself, letting it grow, letting it push out, letting it extend is far better for me than having it where the tree is really struggling and the root system is not able to do its job. It'll survive through this spring period. Like I said, we've got warm, cold weather, so it's not really under any stress at the moment. But once that heat stress kicks in a few months' time, I know that's when this tree is really going to struggle. And yeah, sure, I can protect it, I can do all this temporary stuff, but the tree should be strong enough to work its way through that. So I look at it and think, is it best to let this foliage continue to grow for the sake of the roots? And when I've got a weakened bonsai, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Exactly what I'm going to do. Normally, if you're looking at your tree and it's only sprouted, very small new growth. Like let's say it's just pushed out new leaves, a pair of new leaves, or it's a couple of new needles on a bit of growth, and there's nothing else that's happened with that area. Maybe it's 2 or 3 or 4, maybe a centimetre or a centimetre and a half of new growth, and then it's stopped after all this time, after we've been through our 8-9 weeks of the spring period. If that's all it's done in that period, then I'm telling you, that tree is in a weakened state. So I would look for branches dying on the tree as well. Sometimes you'll see stuff start to grow, and then all of a sudden that branch will die off. It could be a fungal issue, of course, but it could be the fact that the tree is maybe in a slightly weakened state. So look for dying branches, whether it's entire branches or sub branches. Stunted new growth is another thing. As I said, I look for on all of my trees. That's a real telltale for me that something's not going right. Another one is the change in foliage colour. You might see where it's vibrant green, and then all of a sudden a branch here or there is suddenly getting that more olivey, dull sort of look. It's not jumping out of its skin, and you just know when you look at the foliage that's a different colour that something is not right. They're the sort of signals that I look at and say, well, if I push this tree any harder, if I do anything with this tree to make me happier, to make this tree look better, then I'm going to have an issue with it. There's going to be something that goes wrong with this tree somewhere down the track. And you might also, when you're pruning or when you're looking at your trees, you might look at it and go, well, there's, 4 or 5 really strong shoots, but the rest are pretty average. Like there's not much happening for the rest of that tree. So it's like, okay, well, what do I do in that scenario? What's my focus? Do I let these long ones shoot and have the tree push its resources to it? Do I cut it back to push more resources to the weaker buds? And that's pretty much an on-the-spot decision you've got to make based on the tree and how it looks in front of you. So if it was me and it was looking okay in a few areas, then generally that would indicate for me that there's a problem inside the root system where the root mass that you've got, whether it hasn't been repotted as frequently, whether it's not been repotted correctly, the technique was no good and the tree's sort of, not stable in the pot, or it could be that the tree's in pretty lousy mix and the root system just doesn't have the capacity to support and grow as it should to support the entire foliage mass on the tree. It's like, well, what do you do? What do you do in that scenario? Like if you do have this tree, you've missed the repotting window for whatever reason. You might have recently acquired it, or it could just be one that slipped through the keeper. Move on from being angry at yourself for not doing it and think, okay, well, how do I get this tree to that next level? Sure, I can let the foliage grow, but there's only 4 or 5 branches that are growing and the rest are pretty stunted. What do you do? And this is where this time of the year is really important and why I want to talk about it now, because we've still got a little bit of a growing window. I look around the entire country and see the different, from snow to blazing hot to windy to wet. We got everything. Spring around Australia. We tick every box for every type of weather that we've got. But from the tree's point of view, you've still got a growing window before the heat kicks in. So you've got time to get a last ditch effort into pushing the tree to develop a little bit more. So in that situation, if you were in crappy soil, it's staying too wet, or maybe it's only wet around the periphery and it's bone dry in the middle. My favourite task with anything like that is to get a Phillips head screwdriver or a strong chopstick. Normally a screwdriver is a lot stronger for me than a chopstick, and I tend to break the chopsticks when I do this, but I'll just aerate the soil. Put it into the soil, wiggle it around a little bit, move your way around the pot, make sure the holes are about 2 to 3 centimetres apart, and just allow that air-water transfer to happen inside the root ball itself. Get water into the bone-dry core of the tree, or to allow water to get out of there that's been stuck in there. Maybe the pot, check the drainage hole on the pot as well. You might have roots that have grown out there and no water's able to flow out. Whatever it is, clear them away. Do what you can without removing the tree from the pot to allow for some more air water to transfer through there, and to allow the root system to dry out if it's staying wet, to allow water to get in there if it's not getting wet at all. And if it isn't getting enough moisture, soak it in a nice deep bucket for half an hour. Let that moisture really penetrate that deep root core, as well as the aeration, and you should be on the path to doing something positive for your tree, as well as feeding. I love my feeding, love my tea bags, but any kind of feeding that you can do within your environment, I would definitely give it another boost. If you're looking at your trees now and you think, I'm not sure whether I should cut this. I know we've talked about pruning and doing this and doing that, but I'm just not sure whether it's viable for this tree because it doesn't look great. And if it doesn't look great, then just hold back a little bit. And those 4 or 5 long shoots right now, being that we've got, say, another 3 weeks left of the calendar spring period, I'd leave them alone. I would say the tree's pushing resources in those areas. Yeah, there might be a cost for it somewhere down the track to another branch, but that branch may have already been flagged for dying by the tree already because the tree's going, well, it's really not doing much. So, the greater good approach where for all of the tree survival as opposed to the individual part survival, it's taking from one and putting it to another. I wouldn't interrupt that just yet for a weakened tree. Do this other stuff first. Let it go for another 3 weeks, and then as we get into the summer period, that's when we'll have a look and reassess the tree. But it'll be a slow moving beast. I wouldn't expect to see massive change in things. Color change in leaf structure, hopefully that, or needle structure, that's hopefully something that you'd see a big difference in. But again, it could take a little while for that to transition through. So anyway, so this allowing to grow this, when's it best to let it grow? I would think, and my approach is 1 year of vigorous growth is far better for the tree than another year of setbacks. What I don't want to see happen is when autumn comes around next year, branches dying, or when spring comes around, to see where things start to pop or where it starts to push or where it starts to grow, and then there's dead branches. That's heartbreaking. When you've done a lot of years work on trees and you've really pushed and done everything right, you spend every waking moment thinking about the tree. Maybe not that much, but you spend a lot of time working on the tree. You're out there every day having your cup of coffee, walking around, checking on the trees. To have them get a major setback where a branch dies, and hey, this happens to everybody. Absolutely everybody in the bonsai world, I don't care who they are, they always have this happen to trees sooner or later. It doesn't happen frequently, it doesn't happen a lot, but when it does, I sit back and I look at it and go, okay, well, that's a beautiful tree. I've worked so hard. That's had a major bit of dieback there. All right, what's caused that? What haven't I done? So I go through this checklist in my head. Have I been on top of the fungal issues? Yes, yeah, definitely. Is it in a good position? Yeah, it's in a great position. Has the watering been okay? Yes. Has the feeding been okay? Have I done this? Have I done that? Can I tick all the boxes? Is repotting maybe a little bit too slow? And if it wasn't this year that was too slow, maybe was it last time it was a little bit too slow? Have I pushed the tree a little bit too hard with the repotting cycle? And this is the result. So a year ago or maybe 2 years ago, I didn't repot it when I should have, and I knew it was excess time and I should have done it. So maybe I've left it just too long. And now, a year and a half or so later, I'm seeing the impact of that. And that can definitely happen. Trees are very slow moving. They don't do things like we do. You don't see massive changes in a blink of an eye. It's a blink of an eye for a tree is years. That's how they're designed. That's why they make perfect bonsai, because they're, generally, and there's that word generally because not all of them are, but generally they're designed to live for really, really long periods of time. And that's why we use them. The short growing species are great, but you sort of they're a lifetime. Whereas for me, ideal bonsai are 10, 15, 20 lifetimes. Just let them go on forever and ever and pass them down the line somewhere. But so when you see an impact to something, it may not necessarily be the here and now, and it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to put your finger on and say, why did that happen? Why did that branch die? It's like, well, okay, let's talk about the last 5 years of this tree's life. Let's go through every scenario. Was there a really hot summer after a period of time where it wasn't repotted when it should have been repotted? Was the watering absolutely precise and perfect every single day throughout that hot period? Did it get, shelter? Did it get enough food? Did it have, whatever it was, when it was in a weakened state and you got, pests come in, did you fix the problem? And if you did, how much damage did that occur to the tree at that point in time? So it's very hard to put your finger on it. And this is where I talk, holistically about about all this good stuff that we should be doing with our trees. I put my hand up. I don't do it all the time as perfectly as what I should. I damn well try, and I work my bum off to make sure that I do. But yeah, every now and then there's a time where it slips through to the keeper, and you start seeing the impact of it. And that's where this period now, where I look at my trees and think, could I just let you be vigorous for a little bit longer, or is it more important for me to have you in a perfect state? Like, what's the downside of me letting you just be a bit fluffy and just take off and do what you're going to do? What's the downside for that? Is the branches the branches that are allowed to run, are they going to thicken excessively? Is it going to destroy the structure at the apex of the tree? Am I going to see internal dieback because it's going to get so thick and dense on the outside of the tree that I can't get light and air into those areas? What's the downside of letting this just be a tree for a little while, and then I can deal with it a little bit later on? I'm going to talk more in future episode about the pre-summer prune, but it's effectively allowing this stuff to harden off, and then you come back and cut it back prior to the summer period, prior to getting another flush of new growth. Really, you don't want to have brand new foliage as you head towards the hottest part of the year. But by having this foliage sort of harden off and having the roots being allowed to grow excessively because it's supporting the big fluffy foliage mass that's been allowed to vigorously grow, and then coming back and cutting it, you've got a root system which is supercharged, you've got leaves which are hardened off, you've got it heading in towards a heat dormancy period, so your fingers crossed don't get a lot of new growth as you go into those periods. So that all makes sense from a bonsai approach to help the tree get through that hot period. Know that you're going to be watering this tree, and because of that excessive root mass that you've grown, transpiration is not going to be an issue. So therefore, technically, leaf burn shouldn't be an issue because you've got water in or moisture inside the leaf. If there's moisture inside there, it can't burn. So it burns when there's not enough moisture, which means that there's a problem with the root system getting water from the roots, whether it's the lack of supply of water or it's just physically not able to get to the tip of the leaf before that burn period happens, depending on a lot of factors, how long the hot period is, the wind, and all that sort of stuff. But that's my approach to the world. So looking at a tree that's grown a bit long and a bit fluffy is not an issue for me. And if you do let it run, like when's the time to prune? And as I was saying, for me it's either right at the very end of the spring period or right at the start of the summer period, because it's rare, unusual. You'd have to check your weather patterns around your area, but it's rare and unusual for us to get into that first part of summer and suddenly the switch gets flicked and we're at mid-30s, 40 degrees Celsius on a continual basis. It's a slow, gradual build, and then as we get into the second and third month of summer, that's when the heat really kicks in. So you've got a bit of a window still for potential growth for your trees. So allowing them to kick off and run and look after themselves is better. And we've got things like decandling and candle cutting on the pines. I've talked about the candle cutting last episode, but having all those thoughts in my head, whether it's with cedars or pines or junipers or whatever it is, if I look at them and think, geez, that growth is really mediocre. It doesn't always have to be deciduous or natives that you do this assessment on. It's any of the species that I look at and think, if that's average, if that's mediocre, what's the impact going to be? So, I know I've got another month or so, 4 or 5 weeks until I get into decandling the black pines. But if the growth now is pretty average and I look and think, geez, that really hasn't done very much, then it's a red flag for me to say that potentially that tree is going to be pushed to the side and left alone. I'm not going to get into the thought of automatically decandling this tree. And it's like, okay, so I've got another month. What can I do? What's in my arsenal to try and push this tree to get stronger? And then do another assessment prior to decandling. You don't go through the process of the aeration, of the dunking, of the extra fertilizing. Don't do all that stuff and then just go, right, I've ticked some boxes to say I've done as much as I can, or I'm going to automatically decandle that. It's like, no, it's that health assessment. It's where's this tree at? Will it thrive from what I'm about to do, or will it cop an absolute kick in the guts and be set backwards, and then maybe make the whole life a little bit harder than what it is. But anyway, I'm going to move on now talking about these sacrifice branches, because if you've got a few extensions on the trees, it's possibly a time that we can use them for a few reasons. So I'll get into that next. So I've talked about sacrifice branches before. They're used to thicken trunks, thicken branches, all that sort of stuff. And when you look at your foliage mass now, and you're letting it run, or it's run, you're getting ready for a prune, it's often time that you can sit back and just reflect for a few minutes and think about whether you can possibly utilize those sacrifice branches in any way, whether they could do some good to develop the trunk line, develop the branches, but also whether they can be used to increase the vigor of the tree. So there's another part of sacrifice branches that I want to talk about, is the long-term versus short-term sacrifice branches. And short-term sacrifice branches are fantastic. I love them. I use them all the time. I do. When I get a tree that I think maybe there's a bit of an issue with, or it's taken a bit of a hit, or it's probably hasn't developed quite as well as what I should, or it's post repotting and I want to develop some new roots, as I talked about, to increase the tree's engine strength heading in towards the summer period, I let certain, or whether I want to just divert resources to the weaker areas of the tree. Maybe the lower branches possibly haven't grown quite as well as the upper branches. So I can selectively choose certain branches and just let them go, just for a short period. So the short term might be that it's allowed to run until, autumn next year. So it's a 6 month run where I let certain branches on the tree push and grow and really pump up the tree's vigor, because I can use, let's say, half a dozen branches around the tree at different points, apex, lower branches, back branches, whatever, maybe some, like I said, the weaker areas of the tree. I can really let those branches push and grow, because it'll draw resources to that particular area where the branch is running from. But it also overall increases the tree's vigor. The tree gets a bit of a spring in its step where it goes, whoa, look at this. I'm allowed to push and grow, and I can photosynthesize, and my leaves, I'm not worrying about leaf size. So I can get some really nice big leaves in this upper area of the tree, and we can really go to town and do what we've got to do, what we're designed to do. So I let these short-term sacrifice branches go, not with the intention of thickening branches, not with the intention of thickening the trunk, but with increasing the tree's vigor and its happiness, to make the tree a little bit cheerier than what it was before letting those branches run. So I will go through now a story about a tree that I've got in my collection. This tree is a trident maple, big, fat, chunky thing. And if you've been in my workshop, it's one that sits outside my workshop. One of my favourite trees. They're all my favourite trees, you know that. But this one's a beauty. It's in a really shallow pot, really massive base. Nabari is huge, and it's developing really nicely. And I think about 3 years ago or something like that, it took the chocolates at a local show. So it's a really nice tree. Really, I love it. It's got a lot going for it. Leaf is just beautiful. The colour in autumn is magnificent. If you go through any of my socials, you'll see this tree that it's got beautiful autumn colour. Ramifications, lovely. I love it in all seasons. Basically, that's what I'm trying to get to. And I let it go possibly 1 year too long between repotting a few years ago. And the downside to that was, sure, I got nice, fine, delicate growth that year, but post that, I've had a few issues where I look at it and go, no, now that branch has died internally. It's not that I've had too much foliage mass on the tree and the inner areas don't get light. It's just like, the tree's still at that point where it's recovering from my lack of responsible action that I should have taken with the tree. And so what I've done this year is, because it started to raise its head last year, where I looked at it and thought, oh yeah, there's a few little spots that, but generally it's all good, so no worries. I'm going to cut this thing back, make it look great, get in there, prune it back, partial defoliation, whatever, bang, presto, looks fantastic. This year it's sort of like was a bit more. There's a few more branches that had gone. Maybe some of the shoots in parts hadn't grown quite as vigorously as what they should. So I went, you know what? It's time for some short-term sacrifice branches on this tree. So what I've done very recently in the last week is give this thing a nice haircut, but I've also got probably 8 or 9, maybe even more, maybe 10 or 12 branches that I've just allowed to continue to grow. Not with the idea of trying to thicken, as I said, but with the idea of trying to increase the vigour. Now, it's not due for a repot. It's been repotted. It's been well fed. So I'm ticking all the boxes. There's no pest issues with it. So the tree's really getting to the point where its defences are up. The leaf looks great. Everything looks really nice about this tree. But it's just this little bit of dieback that I thought, maybe it's not quite as strong. It could do with a bit of a boost. It could do with a holiday to a warm tropical island somewhere and be allowed to put its feet up for a little while. So I've chosen these 10 odd branches and said, all right, short-term sacrifice branches. I really don't care what you look like on my bench. Whether people walk in and go, that's a funny looking tree to have on one of your displays right outside the workshop. It's like, well, there's a purpose for it. And the reason for that is that I want this tree to get back on track. I want its health to get up to exactly where it should be. Make mental notes. I do this every time. I seem to go through a cycle where I maybe don't repot some of the finer trees quite as frequently. I go for a really tight, beautiful ramification, and then a few years down the track, I might pay the price for that lack of action at that time. So the tree sort of goes forward, then backwards and forwards and backwards, only mildly, because I'm generally on top of it, but it does happen. So allowing these short-term sacrifice branches to run, knowing that they will get a bit thicker in that area. Yes, they will have to be completely removed, but around that area or that branch, that pad where that sacrifice branch is growing, I've definitely got enough other secondary and branches that'll fill the role. Like it won't even, you could cut half the branches off in those pads and you wouldn't know the difference. But for me, it's more about pulling resources almost to every single major branch that I've got on that tree via these short-term sacrifice branches, so the tree keeps pumping the fluid, and that fluid keeps pumping. I expect that there'll be some nice back budding that'll happen in the next, short period of that tree's life, and I'll be back on track exactly where I want to be, and the tree will be a lot happier and healthier. So the second part to what I do when I work on the trees is that bud conveyor, that term that I hear get thrown back at me a lot now when I travel around and when I speak to people. It's great that it's becoming part of a major consideration always when you work on your trees, and that's exactly what's going through my mind when I work on these trees. Is not just to prune it back and make it look pretty, but it's okay. How do I keep that bud conveyor going? And that's through that leaf removal, that partial or specific intention to defoliate certain areas of the tree to allow sunlight and air in there. And when I've been through the candle cutting process, with my pines, it's about needle plucking, so it's not, this isn't something that only applies to deciduous. It applies to our natives, to our exotics, of all different kinds. If sunlight and air don't get in to those inner areas of any of your bonsai, there's going to be a cost. There's going to be a cost, maybe not now, but in 5 years' time when those branches start getting too long and you've got no inner buds there to replace them, that bud conveyor fails, which means that your branches are going to have to be removed, or you're going to end up with a long, shaggy, stringy tree that's not going to look like a bonsai anymore. So when I'm working through candle cutting, I'm also looking at going, well, how dense is the foliage mass around this area? Do I need to remove some of it? When I'm pruning my deciduous, I'm saying, okay, temporary, short-term sacrifice branches, yep, prune the rest of it back, get it back into shape. There's maybe some weaker ones there that haven't grown quite as much. Just leave them alone. Don't prune them. I don't care what the silhouette looks like. It's more about the strength and vitality of the tree. So let the smaller ones continue to grow. But then at the last point, I'll look at it and go, okay, now can sunlight get into those inner areas? Can I see, if I put my hand on the other side of that part of the tree, can I see my hand? And if I can't, then what am I going to do to allow that to happen? And it's specific foliage removal, not a percentage. I'm not removing 50%. I'm not removing 30%. I'm not removing 80%. I'm just looking at going, how much do I have to remove? What's the minimum amount I have to remove to allow sunlight and air to get into those inner areas? What's it going to be? Sometimes it's quite a lot of foliage. Sometimes it's a lot of needles. Other times it's not that much. It doesn't make a massive impact. It's a few here and there. Maybe target the largest leaves on whatever variety it is that you're working with and take a few of those off just to make sure that you've got that bud conveyor still first and foremost in your mind, because it's getting a little bud pop back on a branch. It's not the most exciting thing right now, but in 3 or 4 years' time, that might be the future branch. So doing that work now and every single time that you work on the tree at this time of the year can make such a massive, massive difference. And that's why, you may not want to do candle cutting on your trees. You may just want to let them go. That's fine. But you still need to make sure that you are getting into that inner area, removing needles, making sure that sunlight and air can get into those inner areas, because just having this nice foliage all on the outside of your trees is great, but it's a short-term game, and it might last you 2, 3, 4 years. Perfect, great, looks awesome, but it's not going to be a long-term thing. So this, it feels like you're starting with a plump tree and finishing with a plucked chook by the end of it, but it's deliberate. You've got to balance the need for the tree to have all this foliage for its strength, for doing its job, for photosynthesizing, against the bud conveyor, against the future longevity of this design that you've got for your bonsai. And it's that selective removal. So don't necessarily go in there and flog everything thinking, I want all these buds to pop on the inner areas of the tree. Just think about it purely from the point of view that you want to let enough in there to make sure that these buds start to activate, start to grow. So when that branch gets too long somewhere in the future, you can look at cutting it back. But I strongly encourage you now, as you've got your branch cutters and scissors in your hand and you've got your tree in front of you and it's looking like a big shaggy mess, just run through your head. Could this, before you start tearing into it, before you get the hedge trimmer out and you start making this look like a beautiful little bonsai, just ask the question, could the tree benefit from some short-term sacrifice branches? They don't need to be long-term, don't need to be 4 or 5 year plan. It can just be a 6-month thing. Just get through summer with it, and then or even short term might be another month and a half, 2 months. Wait till we get to the warm weather, then go out there and cut it off. Wait until the end of autumn, just prior to the dormancy period, then cut it off. So give it 6 months to grow. Will the tree benefit from it? I'd almost every single time, so that it's guaranteed that the tree will be in a better position for having these short-term sacrifices. You've got to be very careful that it doesn't destroy structure, but short-term, it's not gonna make much of a difference, other than the fact that you're going to have to look at it and you're going to have to find extra space on the bench. It's very common for me to let these things run more concentrated in the weaker areas of the tree. But if I've got a tree overall, like this trident maple of mine, if I've got a tree like that where I think, overall the thing could do with a bit of a lift, try and position them on every single branch. Have one running on every single branch, just so the tree is pushing resources to every area of the tree. Not just some areas, but every single area the tree's going, hey, listen, you keep extending, you can photosynthesize and do what we need to do to survive this period and thrive, so go for it. So I think sacrifice branches, your mindset is that they're a great tool that we can use for development back in the early stages of development of the tree, when you're focusing on the trunk and the nabari and primary branches. Yep, sure, 100% sacrifice branches are there. But when you're at the other end of the scale and you're in the refinement stage and you're ramifying and you're working on that twiggy structure, the light, fine, delicate growth branches for the tree, you can still use them for a vigor increase of the tree. You don't have to always think about it as doing something to just thicken something. You can do it to allocate resources to a certain area. When you want resources to go to a certain area, we use our scissors or branch cutters to cut the areas we don't want resources. We leave areas alone that you want resources to go to. So if it's a weaker branch, you might find that you're pruning the apex of the tree now or sooner, maybe 2-3 weeks ago, a month ago. But then suddenly now, the weaker areas that didn't get pruned back then because they were too weak suddenly have started to push out because resources are going to that area. And rather than just going in and pruning everything and making it look beautiful, maybe think about that short-term sacrifice branch as a tool that you can use to help increase the vigour of the tree and the health of the tree and the strength of the tree, especially as we get towards the warmer period. Now, I talk about the summer period being a period that we need to be careful for, and we do. If you've been through it, you know that there's short-term periods in excessive heat that continue on in certain parts of the world and country. You know, they get flogged for excessive amounts of time with hot, dry, ridiculous temperatures. Others are high humidity and rain. So now's a period before all that sort of starts to happen that you can really use these tools to build the tree's strength up so it can manage to get through and not just survive but thrive through that period of turmoil, which feels like it's just around the corner. Just like that, we're done. Another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast done. Thanks for listening in. Hope you found that enjoyable. And it doesn't, I just want to reiterate, just before I wrap up this podcast, it doesn't just apply to deciduous. It doesn't just apply to your conifers or your pines or evergreens. This applies to every single tree that you've got. If you've got a weakened tree of any variety, then we can use these short-term sacrifices or just letting the tree push out and grow. Think about it in the back of your head that, more foliage means more strength. That's the end game. We don't want beautiful looking pieces of artwork that are on the verge of having major setbacks. We want these beautiful trees to be thriving and really taking massive leaps forward every year. And this in between time where we're letting things, grow out, get a little bit longer in certain areas, not at the expense of other areas, but letting things grow for certain periods in a managed environment can often boost the tree up a little bit and then make sure that they can get through that next little bit of their life to come out the other side of it a stronger, better, more beautiful butterfly bonsai. So anyway, thanks for listening in. Appreciate it. Appreciate the support. Anyone who's a subscriber to the podcast, I love you. I do. I seriously do. It's fantastic. I love the words of encouragement. I love every part of what this podcast does in the far corners of the globe. And thank you to my mate Brennan, who came all the way from Canada just to pop in and say g'day. So safe travels, mate, and hopefully I get to see you over in Canada in the future. Thanks for listening in. Love you all, and until next time, as always, happy bonsai.